In the Alabama newspapers of the latter half of 1863, strange incidents are to be found throwing light on the administrative duel. The writ of habeas corpus, as was so often the case in Confederate history, was the bone of contention. We have seen that the second statute empowering the President to proclaim martial law and to suspend the operation of the writ had expired by limitation in February 1863. The Alabama courts were theoretically in full operation, but while the law was in force, the military authorities had acquired a habit of arbitrary control. Though warned from Richmond in general orders that they must not take unto themselves a power vested in the President alone, they continued their previous course of action. It thereupon became necessary to issue further general orders annulling all proclamations of martial law by general officers and others not invested by law with adequate authority. Neither general orders nor the expiration of the statute, however, seemed able to put an end to the interference with the local courts on the part of the local commanders. The evil apparently grew during 1863. A picturesque instance is recorded with extreme fullness by the Southern Advisor in the autumn of the year. In this minutely circumstantial account, we catch glimpses of one Rhodes moving heaven and earth to prove himself exempt from military service. After Rhodes is enrolled by the officers of the local military rendezvous, the sheriff attempts to turn the tables by arresting the colonel in command. The soldiers rush to defend their colonel, who is ill in bed at a house some distance away. The judge who had issued the writ is hot with anger at this military interference in civil affairs. Thereupon the soldiers seize him, but later recognizing for some unexplained reason the majesty of the civil law, they release him. And the hot-tempered incident closes with the colonel's determination to carry the case to the Supreme Court of the state. The much harassed people of Alabama had still other causes of complaint during this same year. Again, the newspapers illuminate the situation. In the troubled autumn, Joseph Wheeler swept across the northern counties of Alabama and, in a daring ride with Federal cavalry hot on his trail, reached safety beyond the Tennessee River. Here his pursuers turned back, and as their horses had been broken by the swiftness of the pursuit, returned slowly. They gleaned the county to replace their supplies. Incidentally, they pounced upon the town of Huntsville. Their appearance here, writes a local correspondent, was so sudden, and the contradictory reports of their whereabouts had been so baffling, that the townspeople had found no time to secret things. The whole neighborhood was swept clean of cattle and almost clean of provisions. We have not enough left, the report continues, to haul and plow with. Including Stanley's big raid in July, this was the 21st raid which Huntsville had endured that year. The report closes with a bitter denunciation of the people of the southern Alabama who as yet do not know what war means, who are accused of complete hardness of heart towards their suffering fellow countrymen and of caring only to make money out of war prices. When Davis sent his message to the Southern Congress at the opening of the session of 1864, the desperate plight of the Middle Gulf country was at once a warning and a menace to the government. If the conditions of that debatable land should extend eastward, there could be little doubt that the day of the Confederacy was nearing its close. To remedy the situation west of the main Confederate line, to prevent the growth of a similar condition east of it, Davis urged Congress to revive the statute permitting martial law and the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. The President told Congress that in parts of the Confederacy, public meetings have been held, in some of which a treasonable design is masked by a pretense of devotion of state sovereignty, and in others in openly avid a strong suspicion is entertained that secret leagues and associations are being formed. In certain localities, men of no mean position do not hesitate to avow their disloyalty and hostility to our cause and their advocacy of peace on the terms of submission and the abolition of slavery. This suspicion on the part of the Confederate government that it was being opposed by organized secret societies takes us back to a debatable land and to the previous year. The Bureau of Conscription submitted to the Secretary of War a report from its Alabama branch relative to a sworn secret organization known to exist and believed to have for its object the encouragement of desertion, the protection of deserters from arrest, resistance to conscription, and perhaps other designs of a still more dangerous character. To the operations of this insidious foe were attributed the shifting of the vote in the Alabama elections, the defeat of the certain candidates favored by the government, and the return in their stead of new men not publicly known. The suspicions of the government were destined to further verification in the course of 1864 by the unearthing of a treasonable secret society in southwestern Virginia, the members of which were bound to each other for the prosecution of their nefarious designs by the most solemn oaths. They were under obligation to encourage desertions from the army and to pass and harbor all deserters, escaped prisoners, or spies, to give information to the enemy of the movements of our troops, of exposed or weakened positions, of inviting opportunities of attack, and to guide and assist the enemy either in advance or retreat. This society bore the name Heroes of America and had extended its operations into Tennessee and North Carolina. In the course of the year, further evidence was collected which satisfied the Secret Service of the existence of a mysterious and nameless society which had ramifications throughout Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. A detective who joined this peace society, as it was called, for the purpose of betraying its secrets, had marvelous tales to tell of confidential information given to him by members of how Missionary Ridge had been lost and Vicksburg had surrendered because of this society. What classes were represented in these organizations, it is difficult, if not impossible, to determine. They seem to have been involved in the singular peace movement, which is yet to be considered. This fact gives a possible clue to the problem of their membership. A suspiciously large number of the peace men were original anti-secessionists, and though many, perhaps most of these who opposed secession became loyal servants of the Confederacy, historians may have jumped too quickly to the assumption that the sincerity of all these men was above reproach. In spite of its repugnance of the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, Congress was so impressed by the gravity of the situation that early in 1864 it passed another act to suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus in certain cases. This was not quite the same as that sweeping act of 1862, which had set the mercury irrevocably into opposition. Though this act of 1864 gave the President the power to order the arrest of any person suspected of treasonable practices, and though it released military officers from all obligation to obey the order of any civil court to surrender a prisoner charged with treason, the new legislation carefully defined a list of cases in which alone this power could be lawfully used. This was the last act of the sort passed by the Confederate Congress, and when it expired by limitation 90 days after the next meeting of Congress, it was not renewed. With regard to the administration of the Army, Congress can hardly be said to have met the President more than halfway. The age of military service was lowered to 17 and was raised to 50. But the President was not given, though he had asked for it, general control over exemptions. Certain groups, such as ministers, editors, physicians, were in the main exempted. One overseer was exempted on each plantation where there were 15 slaves, provided he gave bond to sell to the government at official prices each year 100 pounds of either beef or bacon for each slave employed, and provided he would sell all his surplus produce either to the government or to the families of soldiers. Certain civil servants of the Confederacy were also exempted, as well as those whom the governors of states should certify to be necessary for the proper administration of the state government. The President was authorized to detail for non-military service any member of the Confederate forces when, in his judgment, justice, equity, and necessity require such details.